We're going to get started in a few minutes. There's still a lot of folks coming in from the waiting room. Thanks for being here with us.
We'll get started in just a couple minutes, folks.
We're good to start, Joe, if you are.
Great. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the kickoff event for our new series, Confronting Contingency, organized by our team at HELU, Higher Ed Labor United. My name is Joe Ramsey. I'm a full-time senior lecturer in English and American Studies at UMass Boston, Boston's only public university, where I'm an active member in the Faculty Staff Union, that's FSU MTA NEA. I'm also the chair of the HELU Outreach Committee, which has been the hub for organizing tonight's event. I want to thank everyone who put in so much hard work to make this happen. It's simply wonderful to see so many of you here tonight for our first event in this series. This one focused on strategies for abolishing faculty contingency. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box if you haven't already done so. Obviously, with a group this large and a program this packed, we won't have the time open for full group discussion as some might like. But please rest assured that we have built a structure and an agenda for tonight that will allow you all to not only listen to our great speakers, but to speak up and contribute ideas, experiences, questions, and concerns from your own lives and your own struggles. To that purpose, please note today's agenda will include 2 mini panels. You can see it on your screen right now, each followed by a breakout room workshop, as well as a Q&A session near the end of the panels. Facilitated by our volunteer organizers, our breakout rooms will provide you a chance to respond both to the program content as well as to key selected strategic questions facing contingent faculty and all those concerned about contingency's corrosive effect on the higher education mission more generally. And to do so in a space that is small enough for everyone to speak and be heard in a real way. You'll get to pick the themed breakout room you want to be a part of. Feedback from these sessions will be recorded and funneled back to our collective process, a process you will have a chance to join yourself as a part of HELU's new task force on contingency, more about which later in tonight's program. Before we dive right into our first panel, I want to offer just a few words to help frame this series and tonight's event. Not principally my words, but our words. I'd like to call your attention to the framing welcome document for this event series, Confronting Contingency, developed collectively by our organizing committee and soon to appear in the chat box if it's not there already. Some of you hopefully read this before tonight's event as it was attached to emails we sent you. If not, that's totally fine. We'll place it in the chat, as I mentioned, and you can check it out later. But from that document, I want to highlight just an orienting idea or two about how we are approaching this major topic of contingency. As we well understand, this term can mean different things depending on people's position and point of view. Our starting point tonight is that we see contingency as an overarching condition of inequity and insecurity affecting most everyone touched by our higher education system today in some way, including not only faculty and not only contingent faculty, call them adjuncts, NTT, lecturers, part-time, full-time, whatever you call them, but all faculty of every rank, and indeed most all campus workers, from staff to postdocs to graduate students and beyond. Contingency also affects our students past, present, and future, and the families and communities from which they come, and in that way impacts society more broadly. Thus, while the burdens, injustices, and indignities of higher ed labor contingency are borne very unequally across job categories, as well as across institutions and populations, with the inequities of race, class, and gender looming large, and while there is a special need to listen and respond to the concerns of those being most acutely harmed by this system, especially adjuncts and the students and communities they serve, we in this project and in HELU believe that contingency in one way or another harms us all. Yes, contingency also divides us, often bitterly and absurdly in some contexts, but it unites us. And in fact, the divisions it creates between us is part of the problem, and part of why we need to come together across ranks to confront, transform, and ultimately to abolish it for all. To do that is going to require serious strategy, collectively shared, and that is our primary focus tonight. So I'm going to close this welcome with a brief quote from 2 of our organizers and theorists, thinker practitioners you will be hearing from later in the program. Joe Barry and Helena Worthen, whose book, Power Despite Precarity, is one that should be considered must-reading for anyone here tonight. Their words speak powerfully to the animating spirit of tonight's event and to the Confronting Contingency project we are launching together and that we hope you join us in shaping this summer. As they write in Power Despite Precarity, our overarching goal, this is their quote, our overarching goal is to abolish contingency and precarious work as a condition of our lives and the lives of all workers. Socially useful work, including our work, should carry with it the security of employment commensurate to the social need of our work. And with that, let's turn to our first panel. You've already seen it in the agenda, but this first panel will focus on strategic lessons from recent struggles, and it will feature 3 speakers in the following order. I'm going to just briefly introduce them now so that they can just go bang, 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 and we can move along. First will be Bryan Sachs, who is Vice President of the Part-Time Lecturer Faculty Chapter at AAUP AFT at Rutgers University, the site of the very high-profile strike in recent days. He'll be speaking under the title of Adjunct, Autonomy, and Strategic Alignment. After that, we'll have Katie Rodger, new president, congratulations, Katie, in UC-AFT in the University of California system. speaking to the title of Open Bargaining to Win Job Security. After that, we will have Colena Sesanker of the Congress of Connecticut Community Colleges, the 4 Cs in SEIU Local 1973, speaking about building a common good coalition versus a race and class tiered system. I'll be back later, but for now, I turn it over to Bryan.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. I am Bryan Sachs, and I am the Vice President of the Rutgers Adjunct Union, and I was the chair of our bargaining committee of our recently closed contract. And I just wanted to say a few brief words at the top about how I and some of the others I fought with for this historic contract we got into academic labor unionism. It was a few years ago, 2019, that we became part of an adjunct rank and file caucus, and it was it was dedicated to democratic unionism because our existing union leadership was not. So we organized ourselves. We decided to run for office. We won a majority of board seats, and eventually we began in earnest the process of democratizing union governance. We pushed for member participation in every key aspect of our union's functioning. And so very early on in the contract proposal process, we developed article committees to make those proposals with rank and file members playing key roles. We quickly identified the core demands that we would be making on the basis of member surveys, and they included 3. Equal pay for equal work, and that is pay parity with our full-time NTT teaching colleagues. We wanted, second, better job security in the form of multi-semester and multi-year appointments, because adjuncts at Rutgers had neither of those. And third, we wanted subsidized healthcare, identical to full-time tenure stream faculty and other full-time union workers at Rutgers. And we knew we had to organize to achieve them. You don't win demands that are transformative by asking nicely or simply outwitting management at the bargaining table. For us, we decided as a matter of strategy that meant close alignment with the full-time faculty and grad worker unit at Rutgers. Why? Well, they had progressive leadership, and they had a multi-category and multi-class constituency inside that unit. It's tenured faculty, full-time non-tenured track faculty, postdocs, grad workers, and EOF counselors, Educational Opportunity Fund counselors, all in what we call the full-time faculty grad worker unit. And so adjuncts, all alone in their union, we thought, why shouldn't we be in a unit with them too? And out of the discussions that we had with them about this, we agreed that in the coming contract campaign, and this was critical, we would center contingency in that campaign. Adjuncts, non-tenure track, full-time faculty, we would be centered, and that turned out to be the winning strategy. The first thing we did in concert with the full-time faculty grad worker unit was to set out on a merger campaign in spring 2022. We campaigned to become one faculty. It was an enormous organizing success for adjuncts. More than half of our unit signed merger cards. We'd never had any response close to that in anything we'd ever done as a union before. That was the moment where we knew we could win. Of course, the university wouldn't recognize us as a merged unit. They forced us to pursue a legal route through which we were unlikely to prevail, but it didn't matter because it made us stronger. By the letter of the law, we were still autonomous units, and we benefited from that autonomy. But in spirit, we were merged, and we behaved as if we were. In summer of 22, when the campaign started in earnest, I'm talking about the contract campaign, we formed joint organizing committees. We had membership on each other's bargaining committees. And when we finally began bargaining in earnest in the fall of 22, we bargained together eventually. Management didn't want this sort of thing, but we just kept trying. We took advantage of their being overworked or understaffed or both. And eventually it just became easier for them to let us be in each other's bargaining sessions. And so we were. We even created joint proposals for a number of issues that we were bargaining that affected not just our units, but other unions at Rutgers, including staff unions. We made coalitional bargaining a reality at Rutgers. We did other things too that strengthened our hand in the contract bargaining process. We took structure tests together. When we understood that we had to move towards a strike, we held joint strike pledges in February. Then we held simultaneous strike authorization votes in March. And we took simultaneous strike votes on the date of April 9th. And we went on strike together and stayed on strike together for the next week. And so what did this strike win us? Well, it won us very big gains. As we can see on the slides here, if I can ask Rachel to put them up. 30% pay raise for the lowest paid adjuncts in the first year, and it was paid retroactively. It's being paid retroactively, I should say. Nearly 44% total over 4 years. Folks who made well above the minimums, the highest paid adjuncts also got significant raises, 22% for the 4 years of the contract. We also made gains in other areas that are reflected on the next slide. We got those multi-semester and multi-year appointments for hundreds and hundreds of adjuncts. We also won appointment letters that would be received a month earlier. This was a big fight with the administration for reasons we can get into in maybe the smaller discussions. We also got a stronger standard for the renewal of appointments for the first time and got all prior service as full-time non-tenure track faculty counted towards seniority. There are other demands that were won well, but I'm thinking in the interest of time, maybe I'll just go back to some takeaways here and wrap up in just a couple of moments here. In terms of like actual takeaways from the campaign, it's clear that we were stronger together, aligned with the full-time faculty, but it was critical that adjuncts led. We had the issues that most demand redress. And we maintained our autonomy by luck and by design in this process. Adjuncts led, we organized ourselves first. And if you don't organize yourselves first, I think, you don't organize yourselves into a force, well, then the forces of compromise are going to gather around you. They will anyway. But if you're organized, you can fight back against them. And what we discovered, of course, is that the full-time faculty had some of the same issues that we had inside their multi-category, multi-class unit, right? But centering contingency really made the difference for us. And finally, let me just close by saying that we found it beneficial to work with every other academic union we could at Rutgers. But we also think it's critical to organize regionally and nationally with other contingent workers. Contingent workers deserve to be at the forefront of our national movements for academic reform. We should seek to tie academic reform, refunding education, governance reforms, we should tie those to labor reform, ending contingency. But ending contingency, of course, will mean ending the exploitative labor model favored by university administrations everywhere. And I think it's an open question how much they can be reformed, and whether the forces that those administrations are responsive to can be compromised with. We need to be clear-headed about who we're fighting, what we're fighting for, and who we're fighting against. Thank you.
Thank you, Bryan. Next, we have Katie Rodger from UC-AFT.
Sorry, there we go. Thanks very much. Good evening, good afternoon. My name is Katie Rodger, and I am the statewide president of UC-AFT. We are the union representing around 7,000 contingent faculty, lecturers, and librarians in the University of California. I wanted to talk a bit today about how we won our lecturer contract of 2021 after a multi-year fight that spanned basically the entire pandemic and brought one of the biggest wins to contingent faculty, I think we've seen nationally in history, really. The UC-AFT is, as it says, I guess, yes, a union of lecturers and contingent faculty. We are not only lecturers, but also fieldwork coordinators, supervisors of teacher education, and K-12 teachers. We are spread across the state of California on 9 different campuses. We teach everything from freshman level courses up through the classes in our professional schools including law schools, business schools, medical schools, et cetera, in the UC. We have calculated that we teach approximately 30 to 40% of the credit hours at the University of California, making us arguably the largest teaching force in the UC. All of us are contingent in our bargaining unit, and we're funded through temporary teaching budgets, which makes our security really, really tied to politics as well as internal UC budgeting. Most of our faculty are part-time and unbenefited. So what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was how we built this campaign. We started with, as most contingent faculty will recognize, high turnover, churning more than 50% annually. We would see turned over or churned out. The average length of service was a year or less. Very low pay, especially in California. Our median income was less than $20,000 a year. And of course, all of the workload concerns around creep and unpaid work, especially doing university service, were pervasive for our members. What we really did pre-campaign was to build our leaders, our leadership structures. So among the strategies that I think were most effective for us began before we even sunshined. Mia McIver, our president, who really saw us through this, who's on the call today, began, I think, really building an effective leadership structure across the state with an organizing fellows program, of which I participated. That was my sort of entrance into becoming a leader in UC-AFT. And, as the campaign began to be planned, we had quite a few opportunities for leaders to invest themselves in what we were doing. We developed bargaining surveys and held power analyses on every campus that drew in leaders to help determine where we were going to find our strengths, who our targets would be campus by campus, and how we would, in fact, mount a campaign to win. Second, we had flexibility. As I mentioned, our campaign basically spanned the beginning and high points, I guess you'd say, of the pandemic. Our contract expired on January 31st, 2020. And as we were supposed to begin escalating, everything shut down. So we had to immediately shift all of our organizing to virtual spaces. Nobody knew what was going to come. Nobody really knew what the lay of the land would be. So we took it sort of piece by piece. Our escalation plan, as I said, shifted to a virtual one. And we had to be flexible with the ability to, frankly, get a hold of our members, meet our members, talk to our members. A lot of this was being done simply through Zoom. We had to increase member ownership over the campaign. And we encouraged participation in spite of being remote. We did lots and lots of conversations. Phone banks were huge. Zoom phone banks were a way that we could get together and reach out. And ultimately, I think the most transformative thing that happened in our campaign was Zoom bargaining, which we opened up to members. We'd always had open bargaining when we were still in person before the lockdowns began. We would go from campus to campus and invite rank and file members, leaders, observers to come and see bargaining firsthand. But when we went onto Zoom, we opened up essentially the Zoom room. And at times we had 300 observers come and watch bargaining in real time. We had lawmakers come as guests at bargaining. We had our tenured Senate faculty come en masse to watch bargaining. It was fairly incredible, I will say. And what it really, it was transformative for our rank and file members most of all. They had a literal seat at the table. Our bargaining team made a point of allowing members to introduce themselves as observers at the start of bargaining, sometimes taking quite a bit of time to get through the roster of folks in the Zoom. And I believe wholeheartedly that this was part of the pressure that worked to settle the contract. Mindful of my time, I will say that what we won were multi-year contracts for lecturers in the UC system that look essentially like a 1, 2, 3. That is, lecturers would be given a 1-year contract, and if reviewed and deemed affected, they would have a 2-year contract. And then at the end of that, a 3-year contract, which would then enable them to apply to be a continuing appointee, which is essentially more of a somewhat permanent, though still contingent position in the university. We raised the floor with our wages, good raises for all. And we started to chip away at workload. I think that going forward, like many, we still have a lot to do around workload in particular, but we absolutely made gains there as well. Looking ahead to our future, we are looking to grow. I think this is our #1 priority. We are still, like every contingent union, looking for our members, finding them. We have freeway flyers. We still have a lot of part-timers. We do still have some churning, but through a sort of robust plan to defend our contract, we are looking to get ready for the next campaign. So thanks very much. I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions later.
Great, Katie. Thank you so much. And we will have a Q&A with both panels near the end of the event. You'll have other opportunities to engage the content they've raised. We're going to go to Colena right now, Colena Sesanker, for our third and final talk of this first panel.
Thanks, Joe. Hi, all. I am Colena Sesanker. I teach philosophy at Gateway Community College, which is currently one of 12 community colleges in Connecticut. My union, the 4 Cs, spans part-time and full-time faculty and staff. In 2017, our public higher ed system, run by the then governor's former chief of staff, no experience with education, master's degree in something, decided to merge us into a single centrally run community college with 12 branches rather than 12 independently accredited ones. And the plan made no actual sense, except to the extent that it functioned to centralize control to make it more possible to first further adjunctify a workforce that is already 75% adjunct, and second, to commit to less than full colleges at each of our community college locations. And frankly, we failed pretty hard at pushing back against the consolidation, which was, quite frankly, a near criminal theft of state services from the very people most burdened by our state's regressive tax system, and also was a union-busting effort led by Jackson and Lewis lawyer on our board. Union leadership changed. We had to do political education of educators, and many of us are more used to simply mitigating harm than confronting those right in front of us, right? We make our classrooms safe spaces in an otherwise hostile world. And we had to realize, I think, during all of this, that that's no longer possible. Our classrooms were no longer, they were pretty far from safe from those sorts of forces. But it takes time, not only to do political education, but also to build the power structures. And in our case, too much time for that restructure. So rather than fight the consolidation itself, we focused on addressing the harm it does. Last year, we won a fairly good contract using open bargaining that made possible 1-year contracts for adjuncts, though we have yet to see them utilized regularly. We negotiated the same increase for part-timers as for full-timers, and then had to struggle for months while the boss denied and then suddenly remembered that that was the agreement. And this legislative session, we pushed a bill that would require the phased introduction of improving full-time to part-time ratios in our workforce. So while the universities in the system have contracts that impose a ratio like the one that we're pursuing, we knew that our system, because of its state funding limitations, would not be able to bargain with us for a shift in the staffing structure without a significant commitment from the state for ongoing funding. So our intention was to put it through the Labor Committee of the legislature to address all workers, faculty and staff. We are the only segment of state workers who work like this, who are ineligible for unemployment like this, who have no access to healthcare like this. So it seems like it should just be clear from a labor standpoint that this practice would be unacceptable anywhere else. But because of an unexpected and tragic event, the first day of session, we ended up running the bill through the Higher Ed Committee, and short on time, limited by their scope, we ended up with language that applied only to adjunct instructors that would flip the ratio of full-time to part-time instructors on its head. And instead of requiring that would flip it on its head, requiring that 75% of courses be taught by full-time faculty by 2027. And we knew that we'd have to do the work down the line in the contract to limit possible unintended consequences, right? Things like larger class sizes, fewer offerings. We needed to make sure that our adjuncts were being transitioned into these newly created full-time permanent positions. We needed to battle other forms of contingency other than just part-time status. But it was still a triumph, and it would create the space for opportunities. It passed out of committee and was referred to the Appropriations Committee. And then everything fell apart. We went from appealing to the legislature to commit to fair labor practices and to fund that effort, to being caught between a governor who publicly owned up to the project he's been pushing for years through this consolidation, insisting that we needed to right size the system, and an administration who suddenly claimed that if we didn't get the funding we were asking for, we'd have to lay off hundreds of full-timers, eliminate thousands of part-timers, increase tuition, eliminate programs, consider closing campuses, basically higher ed Mageddon, right? So in order for our system to get the funding on the scale that the system was asking for, we would have had to defy the state's constitutional spending cap. And the governor and the legislature basically made it very clear that they didn't intend to do anything like this by reinstating guardrails that were set to expire even before the session began. The only way to get that amount of money would be to take it out of our students' pockets in other ways from other state services, because despite billions and billions of dollars in state reserves, we can't spend them. So our consolidation, our situation, like many of the challenges we faced across the country, is just a detail in the larger political austerity agenda to disinvest in state services. The year that fiscal guardrails were turned into a sort of austerity and disinvestment tool is the very same year that the governor's ex-chief of staff imposed this consolidation on us that would require greater, not less, contingency. So it was always going to happen. Our fight was always going to be linked to the budget of the entire state. It was always going to be a zero-sum game where higher ed interests were going to be pitted against the other interests of our students. This is a multi-year statewide fight, and though it's a fight against adjunctification, it's not an adjunct fight. It is the fight for the system. And though it's a fight against disinvestment in state services for our students and the working class generally, we are the state service being disinvested in. And though higher ed is supposed to be the path to less precarious work existence, the majority of us are precarious, right? We are the working class. So this isn't about some sort of charity for some other. This is about justice for us all. So next year, we're going to come at this legislation again, this time as intended through the Labor Committee. And I want to say that the challenges of the past year indicate that success requires that we embody solidarity with those we serve in the fullest and the broadest sense. So in the sense of a broad coalition, we're not going to be able to restructure the state's budget constraints all by ourselves, but we might be able to, in coalition with the many other faith, community, and labor groups that we've aligned with in the Recovery for All Coalition, which is a coalition structured on bargaining for the common good principles and covers many of the statewide services that our students need to survive. We go together or not at all, right, for the students' sake and the sake of working people in this state. It's a single fight, right? It's for justice, not mere mitigation of harm. The fight against adjunctification isn't an adjunct fight, it's the higher ed fight, and there are all sorts of mitigation measures that we might take to make it just a little more tolerable as exploited labor. But our fight should always be the goal of justice. And justice doesn't simply accommodate a two-tier system where the people who are central, not adjunct, to the mission of our institutions are treated as less than full partners. Every step we take should be focused on and compatible with eventual abolition of that unjust standard. And lastly, we have to understand the race and class dynamics of this. This all happened at exactly the moment that our community college student population crossed the 50% mark in identifying as non-white, and the majority of our students qualify for Pell Grants. If we understand just how harsh life can be for our students and how little society often feels it owes them, if we understand the extent to which things have been broken for generations and no one has ever come to save them, and we understand also then that as public workers who serve this demographic, we are valued exactly as much as society values them. For those of us who either do not come from the same demographic background as our students or hope that we educated ourselves out of them, we're right there with them. And to understand the threat we face, we have to understand that. That's it.
Thank you, Colena. That was just so moving. I'm tempted to just say amen to so many things that you said there, and I can't imagine that I'm anywhere near alone. Now, I know we're probably itching to respond to what we just heard, but because we have two panels and we want to have enough time to address both of them, we're going to actually have Q&A at the end of the second panel. So please right now, jot down the questions you have. Some have already put it in the chat box. What we're going to be doing now to get you involved, not only in responding to that panel, but really taking the next step in generating ideas about some of the themes, topics, and problems and strategic answers to those problems raised by the panel. We are now going to ask you to pick a themed breakout room of your choice. And I have a list of them here, which should be popping up on your screen. Actually just popped up on mine as well. And I'm going to read them through for you here. We have Anne will be hosting Seizing the Mic, Centering People of Color, Women, and Queers in Our Critiques of Tiered Academic Labor. Mike will be hosting Confronting Assumptions of Meritocracy. Bill will be hosting What Are the Levels of Contingency? Who is included and why do we need to work together? Linda Liu will be hosting the Contingent Faculty and Social Reproduction. Are we allowed to reproduce? The Crisis of Care for Contingent Faculty. Jeff Johnson will be hosting Taking on Contingency of State Funding, something that just came up in a couple of the talks. I will be hosting, Joe Ramsey hosting the question of making contingency public, initiating honest dialogue with our students and others in our communities about our status. Helena Worthen will be hosting one on academic freedom, what it is and how we use it. Jill Penn, Organizing Without Collective Bargaining. John Govsky, Strategies on Moving Toward a One-Tier System in Community College, something we'll be hearing about more later from John. Mia McIver, Building Power for Teaching Faculty Within Research Institutions. Tracy Blasenheim, A Unit of One's Own. Do we need contingent-only unions in a wall-to-wall vision? Joe Berry, Uniting with Other Campus Workers, Campus Labor Coalitions Against Contingency. And last but not least, Jane Gabin will be holding a session on organizing beyond the workplace, regional contingent faculty unionism, AKA the Metro Strategy. That's a mouthful, but pick yours, pick one, dive in, and let's see if we can share our thoughts, All right, we're going to welcome another HELU representative to talk about HELU. I know I'm sure we were just getting going in those discussion groups, but we'll come back to that and keep that going. And again, this is only the first event of a summer series, and what we're getting out of these breakout rooms are also things we're going to be generating and pulling into a process to generate that next set of workshops and projects for July. So please welcome our HELU representative. I think we should have, I believe, Ian Gavigan on the call to talk about.
Hi.
Great, Ian. Okay,
Hello.
Here you are. Welcome, Ian.
Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to I want to recognize and kudos to Joe and Helena, to our staff for the event, Rachel, Tracy, and for the whole team of organizers, Mike, Joe Barry, and the rest, Anne, and everyone else who stood up over the past few months to get this series off the ground. This is a critical series of events for not just thinking through the analysis, as Joe said earlier, but also thinking through the strategy for how we confront contingency for faculty and also other workers throughout our higher ed system. So first, I just want to encourage everyone to register. You should see a slide coming up with links, or maybe links coming in the chat. Please make sure to register for our next Confronting Contingency event, which is going to be on July 20th. And we also encourage those here who are feeling moved and inspired to take part in more of this kind of thinking and planning and visioning to consider joining our summer task force on contingency. We want to, we want to be distilling today's ideas into a statement that will kind of map the path forward as HELU and hopefully as our larger movement confronts this question more concretely. And of course, help to organize our next Confronting Contingency event on July 20th. But I'm also here today as a steering committee member of Higher Ed Labor United. I should have started by introducing myself. I'm a grad worker at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, where I'm an executive counselor in our combined grad and full-time faculty union. And I'm also a steering committee member of HELU and have done a lot of the founding organizing work and lead facilitation work for the organization since we came into being about 2 years ago. And I'm really here to pitch folks on bringing your organization to Higher Ed Labor United. Higher Ed Labor United is an emerging coalition of higher ed labor union locals building towards a wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast movement to transform our higher education institutions into truly public goods that serve the needs of students, workers, and communities that we're in. We believe that in order to democratize and to socialize the higher education sector and to contribute to the democratization of American society, that we need to build on two general fronts, that we need to organize as broadly as possible and as deeply as possible within and across our job categories, our institutions, our states, and all the various lines that divvy us up around fighting for as much as we can through collective bargaining, through direct action, through all the various ways that we do those things on and across our campuses. And secondarily, that we have to get past the limits of collective bargaining and the limits of campus by campus action and put forward and advance a strategy that politicizes the struggle around democratizing higher education, around free college, fully funded, lavishly funded higher education institutions with full curricula, and that is ultimately not just a struggle of collective bargaining, but also politicizing and forcing political crises that then have to be resolved. And so these are the kind of two general approaches that HELU is bringing, and contingency is right there across both of them. And it's a key area that we need to come together on. As a grad worker, I see contingency not just in my own life as it's lived currently, but also on the horizon for what's potentially next. And that's the case for so many workers across this sector, that contingency structures, as Joe Ramsey said, our experiences. And so for those and many other reasons, I encourage those of you here who are part of unions, who are part of organizing committees, to consider joining HELU as an organizational member. Though we do have at-large individual memberships, the real critical work is bringing the organizations here so that we're not just kind of individual activists fighting the good fight on our own, but that we're actually bringing the weight of our organizations democratically and with intention to this work, to invest our time and our resources, and to bring our organizations and to bring our members and our colleagues in our fight. So to get involved or to learn more about what it means to become an organizational member of HELU, go ahead and email info@higheredlaborunited.org. And you'll be in touch with one of our great outreach staff. We will set up a time to contact what it means to get involved in Higher Ed Labor United. We have a number of working groups, we have a number of standing committees, we have this task force on contingency, and we will love to find a way to incorporate you and your union and your union siblings into this work. So go ahead and email info@higheredlaborunited.org. Thank you so much for being here tonight. We really, really appreciate it. Excited to see what we all do together. So that's all for me. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ian. And I'm going to move us to our second panel now. Okay, great. I am so excited that we're all here together and so proud to organize with each and every one of you. My name is Mia McIver. I teach as a contingent faculty member at UCLA. I'm the president of CFT's Universities Council, and I'm also a very proud rank and file member of UC-AFT Local 1474. I'm going to introduce our three speakers. John Govsky is associate faculty at Cabrillo College, and that's a community college in Santa Cruz County, California. And John is also co-chair of CFT's part-time faculty committee. Helena Worthen is a novelist, teacher, editor, and contingent faculty activist. She's now retired from the University of Illinois Labor Education Program. Joe Barry is a longtime leader of the International Coalition of Contingent Academic Labor and New Faculty Majority. And as you've already heard, but as I will repeat because it is really worth repeating, Helena and Joe are the co-authors of Power Despite Precarity, Strategies for the Contingent Faculty Movement in Higher Education. And John, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Mia. Can you all hear me? Okay. Hi, as Mia said, my name is John Govsky, and I have been teaching as associate faculty. We actually changed our terminology at my campus from adjunct, which I find extremely distasteful, to associate faculty, and I've been teaching as a part-time associate faculty member for over 20 years. I am also, besides what Mia said, I'm one of the co-chairs of the new CFT task force on trying to come up with a strategy to move beyond a two-tier system into a one-tier system, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. It was interesting when I heard, I think it was Colena speak about Connecticut's community college system. I believe she said there was an official goal of 75-25 in Connecticut, to get to 75% of the courses taught by full-time faculty. Correct me if I'm wrong if you're here. But we have a very similar, actually the same kind of a goal in California. So I think I want to start by talking a little about what's going on in California and broaden it out a little. I think that what's going on in California is very exciting in this movement. And in California, we have a situation which is pretty much the way it is across the country. And that is that we have this baked in two-tier system. Overwhelming majority of our faculty in higher education are contingent. I specifically work in the community college system, and fully 3/4, if you look at head count, of our instructors in the community college system are contingent. Now, this is a huge system in California, 35,000 contingent faculty alone just in the community college system. We have 73 districts, each with locally negotiated contracts. So it's a bit of a mishmash. and different districts are in different places in terms of how their negotiations are working in the state of their contingent faculty. But pretty much across the board, it's the same. And that is that everything relies on contingent faculty, and that the overwhelming majority of us probably will never get that full-time tenured job. Now, we have an official goal in California as well of what we call 75-25. And that has been the official goal for like 40 years. And guess how much progress we have made on moving toward the ratio of 75% of courses taught being full-time faculty. Guess how much progress we've made in 40 years? Anybody want to guess? None. Absolutely zero, none. Now, there have been little fits and starts and improvements in certain locals, yes, but as a, on the whole, in the aggregate, and I'm going to see if the sharing screen actually works here. Looks like it will. Can you see my screen there? Okay. That chart is 2000 to 2019, but if you extend those lines in either direction, they don't move. They stay pretty flat, okay? So despite our official goal, we have had zero movement, right? And I would venture to guess that that's a similar story across the country, and this is not unique to California. So what does that mean? Well, let me give you a little firsthand perspective. I've been doing this work, as many of us have been doing it for a long time. And maybe you can maybe relate to this. You're in a meeting. It might be a union meeting. It might be a meeting of a faculty senate. It might be a professional association where somebody stands up and says, well, you know, the solution to this problem is we just need more full-time hires. We need more tenure lines. That's obviously the solution. That's obviously what we need to focus on. That's obviously where we need to put our lobbying efforts, our resources of staff, and so on and so forth. And guess how much progress we've made? Zero, even though this has been the strategy. The strategy generally is, well, the way out is simply to call for more tenure lines. Well, how's that working out for everybody? Do you see that changing? Do you know what the definition of insanity is? Okay, so essentially, some of us have started to say, well, gee, maybe the strategy is not working. It's not working. And then some of us are started to say, well, maybe it's not just a problem with the strategy. Maybe the goal itself needs to be examined. The goal of 75-25 or whatever it is in your state. The goal of basically changing the ratio so you have more tenure lines and fewer contingents. Okay, why is that our goal? Well, we understand it's better to have more full-time people who can do more of the work and are adequately resourced and so forth. Yeah, that's generally good. But why is the goal simply to have fewer exploited workers? That's not really my goal. I mean, it's good to have fewer exploited workers, but why is that a goal? So I question the goal, and many of us are questioning the goal. Why are saying that we want to reform this two-tier system? And yes, it's good to have less exploitation, but that's not a real goal to me. The real goal is to get rid of exploitation. And that is going to require a strategy that goes way beyond simply saying, well, we need more tenure lines. We need more full-time hires. Obviously, everybody can see we need more full-time hires. It's an obvious strategy. Well, it might be an obvious strategy, but not when you really start to peel away the layers of those onions. And quite frankly, the strategy doesn't work anyway. So even if you believe the goal is simply to have fewer exploited, nothing we're doing is getting there. It's just a reformist strategy that it spins a wheel. It's all it does. And it sucks the political oxygen out of the organizing room so that when we talk about real solutions, we don't get to talk about real solutions. So that's what this is about. So if you are questioning, and this is a sacred cow, right? Now, the sacred cow is we just need more tenure lines. Now, I don't know who, sacred cow makes the best hamburger. I've seen that attributed to Abby Hoffman and others. I don't know who actually said it, or maybe many people said it, but what we're talking about is the sacred cow of more tenure lines equals the strategy. And that's how we're going to get improvement. And I'm challenging that strategy. So if you're not convinced that it's a good idea to directly challenge that, look at the numbers in your state. See how those ratios have been changing or not. And, as academics, we should be using data. Well, all the data suggest, they don't suggest, they shout, the data shout that the strategy of simply calling for more full-time hires is a failure. And I think that we start by recognizing that and convincing our colleagues that that strategy has been a failure. Once you get to that point, the obvious question is, well, how do we get out of this mess? How do we confront contingency? And we do have some possible examples here. Many people have heard of the Vancouver model. Now, in the Vancouver Community College contract, they don't have a permanent underclass of contingent faculty. It is a one-tier system. It's been implemented for some time. I believe there are a couple other places in British Columbia that have done this. So this is not something that's pie in the sky. Now, yes, Canada is a foreign country. And yes, there's some differences between the United States and Canada and the healthcare and so forth. But generally speaking, we can look at other examples as well. K-12. Now, I believe I've hit my 8 minutes. So I'll wrap this up. So essentially, the idea here is that we need to not just try to reform the system, we need to really rebake it. And we need to figure out how to make it so that everybody is a tenure track hire and everybody has the possibility of tenure, and de-link the idea of tenure and job security from the load aspect of things. In California right now, part-time equals contingent. That can be decoupled, but I think I'll stop there because I think I hit my time, and we'll continue later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. Okay, and we'll turn to Helena and Joe.
I think I'm now unmuted. Great. John, thank you. That was really good. So HELU has this wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast goal. And the idea is that by keeping our eyes on this motto, wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast, we can reshape higher education. And you have to be thinking, can we do this? And so the next question is, has it ever been done before? The answer is yes. In the United States, higher ed has gone through at least 4 major transformations. This happened each time the demands of capital, the power of labor, and the claims of the public good engaged and gave higher ed a new shape. What this new shape looked like as it emerged from each transformation was determined by the power relations of these forces as the crisis happened, in a word, the class struggle. The first of these transformations was called standardization. The rise of industrialization after the Civil War demanded an educated management class. To create this class, the Carnegie Commission, Andrew Carnegie, gave us the 3-unit credit course, the 45-hour semester, professional associations, degrees that were comparable across colleges, accreditation by private bodies, and so on. These are things we take for granted today, but at the time they were new. In the shakeout, there were winners and losers. Many small women's or Black institutions fell by the wayside. The professoriate and the vast majority of students were white middle-class males. The standardization transformation held, with variation and some growth, until after World War II, when soldiers came back from Europe, Asia, and Africa. The GI Bill, essentially a voucher system that paid a generous stipend plus your tuition to any college that would accept you, diverted a lot of the job seekers and created a new generation of graduates, though still disproportionately white and male. To satisfy demand, teaching jobs were enhanced by tenure guarantees. New institutions, especially community colleges, popped up all over the place. This transformation was called expansion and brought a wave of the working class into higher ed and eventually the higher ed faculty workforce. Then came the movement transformation of the 1960s and early 1970s, this one driven first by the demands of civil rights activists, many of them Black, and then the anti-war and women's movements. This transformation changed not only the face of the student body and the higher ed workforce, it changed curriculum and how things were taught. This is when ethnic studies, women's studies, Latin American studies, and similar fields were established. This transformation came from the bottom up through sit-ins and demonstrations. The reaction of capital to the movement was, of course, just one element of the neoliberal campaign that was mounted in the late 1970s. Applying the blunt tools of neoliberalism to higher ed meant, first of all, casualization of the workforce, which solved in one whack at least 4 problems that faced managers: cutbacks in funding, rise in unionization, the need for scheduling around older job-holding students, and finally, the way the face of the professoriate had become more female and non-white, a consequence of the movement period. People whose place in society was more vulnerable were also easier to exploit as workers. Over the course of the last 40 years, in other words, casualized employment in higher ed rose until a whole generation of faculty has known nothing but contingency and an entirely two-tier system. So what we need to know about these transformations is that they happen. Second, they are determined not by planners in a think tank or in an ed school, but by the forces on the ground. And third, that the outcomes, who wins, who loses, what turns out to have been too high a price to pay, and what turns out to matter in the long run, are hard to see in advance, which is why we are here tonight talking about strategy. And now I'll turn it over to Joe Barry.
You are muted, Joe.
Thank you. The first thing to say about strategy is that there has been no conscious strategy for the higher ed labor movement implemented in this whole 50-year period of neoliberalism. Instead, the victories that have been won, especially by the contingent majority, are the result of hundreds of tactical decisions based on what worked and what didn't work. These have added up to 2 strategies that have finally been somewhat theorized and discussed. The first is a strategy for organizing. It's been referred to as the metro strategy or the labor force appropriate strategy. Since the 1990s, it's been clear that organizing adjuncts at one institution after another was never going to abolish the two-tier system or substantially raise the floor for working conditions. Instead, because we work for multiple employers, periodically or simultaneously, we need to approach organizing ourselves on a workforce appropriate, metropolitan or regional scale. The metro strategy draws from precedents among building trades workers since the 19th century, longshore workers in the 1930s, entertainment workers today and before, and others. It proceeds from the notion that we are not primarily identified with a particular employer long-term, but rather with our industry, our craft, our profession, and our fellow workers. A metro organization must be an organization that can be easily joined by anybody in the sector, working in the sector, whether or not their current employer is a likely target for unionization in the short run. There are examples of effective metro organizations in Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, emanating from 3 different national unions. Those are just 3 examples, but 3 of the best ones. The second strategy that has emerged through this hit or miss process is a strategy for power building. And we and others have called this the inside-outside strategy. Contingents do not usually exercise our appropriate, often majority voice and influence in our national or many local organizations or statewide organizations. We tend to be scattered and isolated. As second-class members of these organizations, we need to separately organize to speak with a unified voice. Another way to say this is getting our act together. Only then can we leverage the larger group's power to achieve the changes that we desire. This idea builds on the tradition of rank and file caucuses, racial, ethnic, and women's caucuses. It's parallel historically to how teacher unionism first began as union federation caucuses, teacher caucuses within the old NEA, which at that time was dominated by administrators and a few education professors. The outside part of this strategy usually happens outside of the formal structure of a union, but not always. From this position, we can speak directly to allies, such as other unions or to our students, in a way that the larger union that we don't control can't and often won't. The inside part is us taking this self-organized power back into the larger group that we do not control and speaking there in a unified voice. We find that we can then influence actual leaders of that organization to change the direction and more accurately reflect our needs, sometimes become the leaders ourselves. Of course, the larger organization has to be won to the idea that fighting for our needs will make it stronger overall in the struggle against the employer and to protect the values of higher education generally. We would argue that every place where contingents have made substantial advances has been through the use, consciously or not, of the inside-outside strategy. HELU itself is a kind of inside-outside strategy. 13 different unions represent higher ed workers in the US. In none of them do we, higher ed workers in general, have more than 25% of the membership. But we can use the power we build through Higher Ed Labor United movement to get them to confront the problem of the two-tier system, one of the clearest problems in higher education. We need both these strategies, the metro and the inside-outside, and others that will emerge collectively to manage the next transformation in higher education. HELU, by organizing higher ed workers wall-to-wall and coast-to-coast, can shape the next transformation directly and leverage the greater power of these 13 national unions, the larger labor movement and its allies, in a struggle that none of us can win or even fully understand by ourselves alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. All right, so we've got some time for Q&A now. Thank you, John Govsky, Helena Worthen, Joe Barry. I'm going to welcome back from our first panel, moderator Joe Ramsey and speakers Bryan Sachs, Katie Rodger, and Colena Sesanker. And I'm going to invite people to put their questions into the chat. We're especially interested in questions about strategy. I've seen a few questions in the chat so far about the Vancouver model, about UC-AFT's Organizing Fellows program, about let's see, also about the structure of HELU. Grace Chi, I saw your hand a few minutes ago. I especially want to invite you to type a question into the chat so we don't lose track of that one as well. And while people are thinking of questions and typing questions into the chat, Joe Ramsey is going to start us off with a question for our panelists.
Yeah, such really wonderful presentations from you all. And I'm glad we have you all on the screen so the first panel doesn't get lost here. And I really, I'm kind of calling an audible here. And I'm just going to say, John, I mean, I feel like your presentation invoking the one-tier horizon, if you will, right? And really, I think, resets kind of the compass a bit. And it actually, from a HELU perspective, it potentially resets our compass, right? Because the HELU position on contingency it never has been from the beginning, just more tenure track hires, but it was more tenure track hires and converting existing non-tenure track contingents adjuncts into those positions. So I just want to clarify that, but then also raise that as a question to you all, right? I mean, and maybe John could say a little more about, basically, my question is, if we share that goal, how do we get there? Do we see, and how can we perhaps connect the organizing we're doing now to that horizon in a way that becomes concrete, whether that's at the level of our campuses or at the level of state legislation? Obviously a huge question, but I would love to hear John say a little more about, because you got cut off, a little more about like your views of the concrete steps, the Vancouver model or California model or whatever. And if others could maybe briefly just offer one thought on that idea. Do you share that horizon? I suppose it's okay if you don't. This is a process. And if so, or if not, what do you see we can do concretely to contribute to at least closing that gap, if not eliminating it altogether? So John, maybe you could start.
Well, thanks, Joe. Well, the call for more full-time hires generally is among the enlightened organizations accompanied by the second line, which is, and those jobs should go to existing adjunct faculty or something like that, or there should be conversions or something like that. And in my experience, that, no disrespect to HELU and the other organizations that take that line, but it doesn't seem to work that way. And even if you could get those lines, there's no way, short of really legislating it, to make sure that those jobs would in fact go to your existing folks. Generally speaking, if you do create tenure lines, sometimes people who are teaching there already may get some of those jobs, but generally speaking, those are open hires that don't go to the people that have been teaching part-time or contingent at those institutions for a number of years. And so the danger is if you're going to link those together, which they should be linked together, but ultimately it doesn't really, in my experience, work that way. And it's a nice thing to say, and it sounds good, and it's a good sentiment, and I think we all appreciate that. But it doesn't seem to play out that way when, in fact, if in fact more tenure lines are even created. And generally speaking, because the strategy of creating more of the full-time positions isn't really working, I don't really have that fear that it's going to displace existing people, because I don't really have the hope that that call even manifests. So essentially, I just don't think it works that way. And again, the sentiment is good, but again, without challenging the real fundamental basis of the two-tier system, all you're really doing is saying, well, there should be less exploitation. And again, that's a good sentiment, but I think the sentiment should be, we don't want any exploitation. It's not good for the students, the faculty, the staff. It's just not a good idea, and labor unions across the country are always working against two-tier systems. And there's a reason for that. They screw the workers. So I've seen that same kind of language. It's in a lot of the organizations that call for more tenure lines. And it's great, but it doesn't really do much. So I just have to say that. But I'm welcome to be challenged on that. If somebody can point me to an example where that's actually really worked well, I'd love to hear it. Okay.
Thanks, John. Okay, we have Joe, do you want to respond?
Oh,
I just thought maybe Bryan was unmuting to speak to the question of,
go ahead.
for 30 seconds, maybe 30 seconds. I mean, I can't dispute what John's saying, but I do want to just point out one thing that happened at Rutgers, which was that non-tenure track full-time faculty who are part of the full-time tenure stream faculty union with grad workers and others there, they organized originally they organized to get teaching tenure, but in the course of organizing for teaching tenure, they came to prefer what they hit on as presumptively renewable appointments. It's not tenure. It doesn't come with some of the responsibilities of tenure, and it was deemed to be preferable by many of the teaching faculty at Rutgers. The standard for non-reappointment is extremely high. You can only be fired for cause. It is effectively, they came to believe, John, I'm glad to see you nodding, like tenure, right? It gets around, I think, some of the problems that can be associated with those full-time jobs that you mentioned, although I don't know that it's a scalable solution. I just wanted to mention it to folks.
Katie?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that at the University of California, there is this sort of strange title called a lecturer with security of employment, which is not a lecturer in UC-AFT, our union, nor is it officially a tenure track professor per se. Sometimes these are positions labeled as a teaching professor. But I see this as where this whole question can really go wrong, in the sense that often these lecturers with security of employment are recruited, folks who have been lecturers in my union. They are in many ways third class citizens in our system, where they don't have the protection of a union because they're not in our bargaining unit, but they're not entirely folded into the academic senate, which is the University of California's governance system. So you end up with this really strange third category of folks who tend to be severely exploited, though they are essentially on a tenure track of sorts. And I think that this is my fear for what, pushing for more tenure can look like. A system where essentially those of us with unions are removed from bargaining units, left with no representation, but really disenfranchised from shared governance and any sort of true path to what we would recognize as traditional tenure. I just wanted to point, that's the University of California's model.
Okay, Helena and Joe, and then we have a lot of other questions in the chat, so we'll move on after that.
Don't we get a chance if our hand is up?
So please put your questions and comments into the chat. We only have 15 minutes for Q&A right now. Thank you.
Muting there. Okay. I just want to bring into the conversation the fact that HELU has this wall-to-wall, coast-to-coast vision. And there are nearly half the states in the United States do not have collective bargaining in higher education. And in places like Texas, it is actually illegal for a university to sign a collective bargaining contract with faculty. So when we talk about contingency, we need to spread it way out beyond just the solutions that you can get through with a union that already exists.
Put some stuff outside. Downstairs, I got to put some stuff away.
Okay. I know there was one breakout room that was being led by Jill Penn, and I hope that we hear from her and find out something about what she said. And I hope we try in the academic freedom workshop that I was just part of. We had 3 stories, which included full-time tenure line faculty who experienced contingency just as if they were part-time temporaries in the California community colleges. I'm exaggerating, but the contingency is not protected by having tenure.
Am I next?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, John's fear that we would not get those jobs, even if they come, is supported by research, which shows that years of work as a contingent becomes a disability at about 3 years. After that, it becomes a detriment, not experience, to be looked at positively. And there's some serious research for that. Anybody that wants a citation can send me an email at joeberry@igc.org. Secondly, the problem with these is almost never do these promotions to tenure-like, and it's important to say we're not necessarily talking about tenure. We're talking about positions with just cause job security, right? Often those positions are handed out very narrowly to cherry-pick people, right? And the importance of getting rights to those jobs on the basis of, seniority evaluation and upgrading is very important. We have a little bit of that in the San Francisco Community College District's AFT 2121 contract, which says that the administration, if they fill a job, a full-time tenure track job, with an outsider, they have to be able to demonstrate that that outsider is not just equal, but superior to the internal applicant. And And that has meant that the vast majority of full-time tenure-track jobs have gone to existing adjuncts, although not necessarily in order of seniority. There's still cherry picking that takes place. I think that this underlines the need to really make our goal the abolition of contingency and the abolition of a two-tier system completely. And we need to make that as explicit as possible in everything that we say and do.
So we knew that we would have a whole lot more to talk about than we have time to fit into 2 hours today. And that's why we are already planning future events when we can take up all of these wonderful questions. We have about 3 minutes left in this agenda item. And so I want to take a question from the chat that drew a lot of interest, which is about how do we organize with the kind of resurgence of online teaching? How do we connect with folks? How do we align and strategize and mobilize? I think we faced this question years ago with the rise of the MOOCs, and we thought that MOOCs were dead, and then the pandemic came and revived online teaching. So I invite all of our panelists to speak to how you organize in an era of virtual instruction.
Well, I'll just say that, this is a case of building the boat while we're sailing it. It's not unique to us because dispersed online work is something that people are having to confront all over. One of the best organizing bodies in the country, committee, helped many people organize since the beginning of COVID, put together by the United Electrical Workers and the Democratic Socialists of America nationally, have been trying to do some training and centralizing some information as to how people should be doing that and what's worked and what hasn't. But I would actually argue that similar than and the need to develop personal communications with people remain the same.
All right, are we at official time, Mia, here? Okay. Thank you all to this great panel. We could go for another half hour. I think you could. I mean, you all could. And in July, undoubtedly, we will return to many of these questions in a panel format. Right now, we're going to take up these questions in breakout room format, not an assigned or chosen themed breakout room, but an open breakout room where we all have a chance now to sit, not only to write in the chat box what we wanted to ask or say about these presentations, but we can talk. All right. Well, if you're feeling like I'm feeling, that breakout room went like a flash. Apologies to Joseph Garcia, who just got cut off mid-sentence in our right on the verge of some brilliance. I just want to say that if you were cut off or you had more to say in your breakout room, then we hope that you will not only put it in the chat right now, because all this will be saved, but you also send it to us and sign up and register and come to the planning meetings that will be processing all this feedback and more feedback to come as we chart this path for this Confronting Contingency series with a July 20th event on the calendar, but more in the pipeline. In fact, the content of that July 20th event has not yet been developed. We have lots of ideas. We definitely want to include other workers in addition to faculty who are facing contingency related issues, but we hope you are the part of the collective author of this study. So please see this as a beginning. And if you were literally cut off mid-sentence or about to say something, please say it in the chat box. Say it to us. You know, I'll put my chat as an outreach chair for HELU. I will put my personal email in the chat. You can reach out to me, our staff members. And right now, I believe we have, I can't really see other people's faces right now because of the configuration of the screen, but I believe we have Levin, one of our great leadership from HELU, who's going to just remind you again and walk through some of the ways very concretely you can get involved both with the contingency event and HELU more generally. And again, as one of the organizers of the contingency series, the Confronting Contingency series, this is my personal plea for you to do that. We really want to hear from you. And if you've been on, you're one of the 88 people who's been here for almost 2 hours, you're clearly committed to this. So let's harvest that energy and that thought, and let's make this the beginning of a new wave of HELU organizing that can be really, really, really powerful before the summer's up. Where the summers that we keep this going, this kind of discussion going. Imagine where we could be in August and what we could hit with in September, folks, across this country and coast to coast and wall to wall. Levin, please take the baton. It's hot.
All right. Can everyone hear me okay? Sorry, I'm outside. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Levin. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the president of UW Local 4121. We represent academic workers here at the University of Washington. Apologies for being outside. Our postdoctoral researchers and research scientists just won new contracts as of 20 minutes ago. So it's been an exciting day. But I wanted to round out all of the great discussions that we've been having so far today with a plug for how to get involved in HELU and how to stay in touch. Like Joe mentioned, there is a registration link for the next panel on the contingency series. Throughout the summer, we're really hoping to develop this discussion and make this into a space where we can strategize with each other and build power together to rethink what higher ed can look like. Additionally, there is a new HELU task force on contingency. So help us process the ideas from today into a new statement on contingency for HELU. And again, really wanting folks to be able to take up the space for discussing ideas and strategies on what a better higher ed can look like for all of us. And if you're interested in helping plan our next Confronting Contingency event, the next event will be on July 20th as well. I think Rachel and Tracy and other folks are also putting links in the chat for how to stay connected with HELU more broadly. There is a newsletter that we have, and we have a number of standing committees. One of the exciting ones is the National Coordinated Organizing Committee, where a group of folks meet bi-weekly to be able to share ideas and also updates on different higher ed campaigns that are going on, and to be able to identify common themes that are running through all of these different campaigns on different campuses so that we're able to better coordinate with each other. I will be here for a couple more minutes. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer any about HELU or what getting involved has looked like for me or other folks, but I think that's it. And also big thanks to Rachel and Tracy and others whose work and help has really made this event really successful. So thank you.
Great. So if anyone does have a question for Levin right now, you could feel free to put it in the chat box, or you could even ask it out loud. I think if you'd like to raise your hand if you have a specific organization related question. I also want to point out, as we are wrapping up this event, after that we take those organization kind of nuts and bolts kind of questions right now, we will wrap up this event just about on time, actually, amazingly enough. I do want to say, I was going to say one other thing, thank you to everyone whose labor went into today. And also, and I'm not going to name everyone for fear of leaving someone out, but there were a lot of people, dozens of people that have helped to make this event happen. And I wanted to say that it's just been an inspiration to work with all of you. And there's something else I'm trying to say, but I can't remember it. So let's see. Do we have a question? Yeah, I will put my email in the chat. Absolutely. Here it comes right now. It's jgramsey@gmail.com. I am the chair of the outreach committee, but there's many other folks you can reach out to as well directly. I just put it in there, JG Ramsey. That's Joe Ramsey's email. I keep it off the university server for reasons that might be apparent. But I want to just leave some space for a question for Levin right now before I formally wrap us. Okay. Yeah, folks, we had 400 people register for this event today and 200 that were able to make time this evening on this. In many parts of the country is a beautiful day. I know in Boston we're getting a heat wave very soon. So, but we're inside here on the beautiful night doing this because it's really important, and it's not going to happen unless we make it happen. So I just really am grateful for you all being here. I'm talking to I'm not talking to your faces right now, but I know you're there, and I want to see you hopefully in a smaller group setting. We can talk soon and organize together. Let's change this higher ed system, from the bottom up. And let's dig into it and develop the strategies necessary to do that, because we know it's not enough to have emotion and rage against the system, much of which we have, but we as this event shows, we need to focus on strategies that can actually help to make the world possible. I know the final thing I wanted to say after we finished recording this event, and maybe we already have, it looks like, no, we're still there. When we will hang out for a few minutes. You want to just talk informally off camera and just get to know a few people here and maybe plug in the old fashioned way in the new era of Zoom, which is to say, just chatting a bit and following up. We will hang out for a few minutes and we can connect that way. Otherwise, I'm going to sign us off for the evening at just about 9 o'clock.